Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Sunday episode of the Inking Out Loud podcast. Today, we'll be diving into and completely through The Ruin of Kings by Jenn Lyons. I'm your host, Rob Santos, joined, as always, by my co-host, Drew McCaffrey.
How's it going, everybody?
And just before we begin, we'd like to give a quick shout-out to our newest patron at the Radiant level, Mr. Armando Urivez. What's up, Armando? Thank you very much for your support, dude. And another quick reminder that for anybody who wants to be as awesome as Armando and get access to a bunch of extra content, including our episodes on short stories, a peek at our upcoming schedule, access to episodes a whole week early, and even the chance to suggest titles for us to cover in the future, visit our Patreon at Inking Out Loud. So, now, Drew, my man, The Ruin of Kings, how do we begin this episode?
Well, we're not going to begin with the normal recap that I do.
Yes.
And that is because I did not finish reading this book. I got to page 227 and I was just done. I did not care for it. I thought it was very poorly written, poorly constructed. The story did not pull me in. I did not care about the characters. It did not do it for me. So I don't have a recap.
Well, okay. So I'm going to come in right after that and say that I also did not finish this book. I made it a bit farther than Drew did. I made it, according to my e-reader, to the 71% mark before everything that you just mentioned it was just too much. I mean, I was sort of, and I will say, I do have some compliments to give Jenn Lyons. There were a few parts of this book, particularly through, I think it was chapters 15 through 20, I want to say, where things really started to ramp up, and I was like, oh, okay, this is actually going somewhere. I'm actually getting pretty excited about this. Didn't last long. Somewhere between all of the sexual overgratification and the extended lectures about Kieran's parentage that kept having all these twists and turns, and there was just it was too much to keep track of. I was just getting sick and tired of of a lot of things that I'm going to be talking about in this episode going forward. I guess I do kind of want to start with the compliments though, because they're like less in number. I guess I should start by saying this, Drew. What did you like about this book, if anything?
So, complimentary wise, I will say this is an ambitious book. It is a testament to Lyons' mind that she came up with this idea, and that she eventually put pen to paper and wrote this out. I'm sure she has extensive notes and probably her own internal wiki or something to keep everything straight. I'm sure she's put a lot of time and effort into world building. It is a kind of an avant-garde narrative structure. There are, you're going to see lots of comparisons to Patrick Rothfuss with the Kingkiller Chronicle when you discuss this book online. You're going to get basically with this book, you're going to get a non-traditional story style. And I'm willing to give her, some props for trying that. The problem with it is that she does not have the writing chops to pull this off. We can go into this a little more deeply when we start talking about style in a few minutes here, but mostly it felt like a complex story for the sake of complexity, and that there was no real narrative momentum to it, and that it was just something that, was like tailor-made for fans of like Malazan Book of the Fallen, who just want a bunch of capital words, capital letter names that mean nothing, but you have to remember just in case they mean something down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not put together well. It it lost me almost immediately. So while Lyons deserves some respect for trying this, I think ultimately she fell short.
Okay. Well, I'll start by saying that I agree with pretty much everything you just said. The only thing I would say differently is that this book didn't lose me immediately. It lost me, if I'm being completely honest, about halfway through. I was already having a lot of things to gripe about beforehand, but I was also having a lot of things to really compliment her about beforehand.
Really?
But it was just the good started to fade and the bad just kept getting worse. I guess
Yeah.
was how I would say it. Like, and I do want to like just dive quickly into our right away into our narrative style discussion here because I want to get your opinion, Drew, on how she sort of justified this kind of switching narrator styles. Like, because I thought at first it had this great kind of meta feel while kind of remaining almost whimsical in delivery. Like the fact that Talon and Kieran disagree on where the story really starts, I thought was a neat way to justify the two different timelines. But I also wanted to get, your opinion on that. What do you think, dude?
Yeah. So I will agree that was a good touch for her to start off with by having a disagreement, and so we know from the get go that we're gonna have unreliable narrators with this, right? You know,
Yeah.
we're gonna have people telling these stories for their own reasons, and again, this is something that you can compare to the Kingkiller Chronicle with Patrick Rothfuss, where we're getting a story told, in the first person for a reason with the innkeeper coat. He has his reasons for telling the story he's going to. And similarly, Talon has those reasons, and Kieran has those reasons in this. However, the the result of this flip-flopping narrative here is that she tries really hard to leave you off on like mini cliffhangers
Uh,
at every single chapter,
hmm.
and that gets old real fast, especially because the cliffhangers like don't ever have any oomph to them. There's no weight because like, and this is where
There's a couple. Sorry, go ahead.
this is where my biggest issue uh with it is that the transitions on both a chapter level and a scene level, and sometimes like a conversational level, are atrocious where they exist at all. Lyons has no ability to move the reader through a scene. It like things just happen out of nowhere. There's no sense of conclusion to a scene before the next scene starts. There's no um there's no transition in dialogue. You'll have scenes where somebody's having like a light-hearted conversation, and then just suddenly one of them gets really serious and goes off on a completely different bent in the middle of this conversation, and there's no conclusion to the first half of the conversation, and the second half feels like it just came out of nowhere. And it's, I mean, especially after we're in the middle of reading The Wheel of Time, and we just read Foundry Side, and we just read A Memory Called Empire. We're reading books by authors who have a masterful ability to transition between scenes. Ruin of Kings is jarringly bad. I mean, it it feels like, and I hate to say this, the scene transitions or lack thereof feel like the shitty fantasy novel I wrote in 8th grade.
Yes, then this is part of exactly what Drew was, because we discuss the book that we're reading sometimes. We throw impressions back and forth as we're going through the week. And that was something that I told Drew. I'm like, dude, you have to make sure you say that on the episode because I got a good laugh. And I also very, very much understand and appreciate what you just said there. Like, a lot of times during this book, I found myself stopping, taking a step back and thinking, like, wow, this is something that I could have seen myself writing in like 7th grade, 8th grade. Like, and you're right, she's not
Yeah.
very subtle with her transition between scenes. And like there were times that I felt that she actually, I won't say I really I don't know. I won't say it bothered me quite as much as it bothered you in this respect, because I found there were some scenes that I thought, okay, that cliffhanger did land for me, but they were still vastly outweighed by those that didn't. But I can give an example, I think, for both sides of this argument.
Uh-huh.
For example, a scene that I found really, really awesome, I think came at the end of chapter 15, when things really started to ramp up, when the Kraken caught up to them on the ship, on the Misery, and things just really started to get out of control there. You know, we had Kemezra telling Kieran, saying, look, you're going to have to watch two Wraiths back, because both Tyanso and myself are going to be completely distracted in using all of our abilities just to keep this ship from being ripped apart, from, you know, having to withstand forces that it was never built to withstand. I felt like the way that chapter ended was awesome, because it felt momentous. It felt like, oh shit, like it's really about to hit the fan. And then the next chapter had, you know, it was from Talon's story, and it had Kieran finally approaching the general Milligreast, and, like, you know, his meeting with the general. So I thought, like, the pacing really, really picked up there. It was great. But to balance that, to give you a chapter that I felt ended very shittily and kind of pissed me off when it picked back up again, was at the end of chapter 59. But I'm not going to say exactly what it was, because the important part is chapter 61, the chapter right after the one in between 60. It begins, and Drew, you didn't quite make it this far, but there was one particular great moment where Relos Far kind of arrives, and you think, oh shit, like, uh-oh, how is Kieran going to get out of this one? But we also get this intermediary chapter that, you know, flashes back to Talon's story, and then chapter 61 begins with Kieran thinking, wait, little brother? And I thought, little brother, as if Relos Far had said. Well, why is Kieran saying little brother? Why does that doesn't make any sense? And I was so confused. I kept reading the sentences beforehand, trying to get the context for why Kieran is thinking little brother with such confusion. And then I remembered that in chapter 59, it ended with Relos Far arriving and calling him that. And I thought, well, damn it, Lyons. Like, you can't just pick up in the middle of a conversation where the subject was given like 15 pages ago with no transition between them. It, like, at least remind us of the context before launching straight back into that same conversation. Or at least our protagonist's reaction to something he was told like 2 chapters previously, for fuck's sake. Sorry, go ahead.
And this goes into another one of my biggest issues with this, is that because of this split narrative structure, the momentum and pacing is just all over the board.
The momentum is somehow staggering. How do you have a staggering momentum? It doesn't make sense.
It's super disjointed. There's no real flow to get into when you're reading this book, especially if you really care about one plotline and don't care about the other one. Yeah. Like, you know, some people will complain about, reading The Wheel of Time, and they'll say, like, I hate Perrin chapters, and I just want to skip Perrin chapters. It's like, you know, okay, so, you know, and they'll complain that, like, oh, I'm reading along this plotline, I get like 4 Rand chapters in a row, and then suddenly I have Perrin chapters, and I'm like, no, I just want to get back to Rand. You know, that's one thing, but, you know, that's also, like, the way those books are structured. You have chunks of chapters. Yes. So you don't just have, like, a staggered, you know, thing. So you have a smooth momentum arc across whatever the 5 Rand chapters are, and then that leaves at a logical cliffhanger usually, and then you go to the Perrin chapters and you have a smooth momentum arc across those, and that leaves at a cliffhanger, and then maybe it'll go to Egwene, and then it'll go to Elaine or something, and then we'll get to the climax, and we'll get like 2 chapter sections of each of those climaxes, you know. Whereas in this, it's just like staccato, like doot 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 doot, where you can't ever really get in a rhythm with either of the storylines because they're being constantly interrupted. And on top of that, the pace, the intra storyline pace is off kilter, where like Kieran's story, the pace picks up faster than it does in Talon's story, where, like you said with the Kraken, for instance, and the Maw, like, the action picks up in Kieran's story there like 4 chapters before the action picks up with Milligreast and the dinner and everything going on with Kieran back in the capital. You know, like it's so you're like lurching forward and back with each chapter for like a 5, 6, 7 chapter span there, and it's super off-putting as a reader.
Yeah,
you know,
no, the fact that she stuck to her guns and kept that sort of very rigid back and forth structure, I felt like she really restricted herself narratively. She really, really did. I don't know. It definitely lost a lot of impact for that reason.
Sure. And so I have a few more style things I want to talk about, and that is what the best purpose of this like alternating narrative style can do. And I'm going to once again use Patrick Rothfuss as an example of this.
Sure.
What the frame story versus Kvothe's story does in Rothfuss is it provides context. Like there's a conversation between scenes and between narratives there, where you'll get hints and tidbits in Kvothe's story, and then you'll come back to the chronicler's point of view, and something will happen in the inn that adds a new light to whatever happened in the Kvothe story that you just read. Or it will provide foundational context for the Kvothe story that you're going to read in the next, whatever, 5, 6 chapters. And in this, there's no conversation between the narratives, at least through the first 220 pages. There's no conversation. There's no like, they feel completely isolated from one another, even though it's the story of the same person, just at different points in his life. Like it feels like it would have been better served just putting it in chronological order
and telling a linear story.
Yeah, because there's no like added value from having these.
You're right. I was kind of not sure if I would agree with that until at the very, very end you said it didn't really add value. It didn't, like, stylistically didn't really lend anything to it. You're right. I think it could have been told just as fine or even better in a linear fashion.
Yeah, and so what it...
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry,
what happens is that it comes across as Lyons like trying to be like avant-garde and showing off, for the sake of like showing off by and doing something like cool and new, even though it doesn't come across as cool or new because other authors have already done it and done it better.
Yeah. Like
it just like I have severe problems with the structure of this book. And that's unfortunately not even the only structural issue I have with it, because we haven't talked about the annotations and the endnotes. And these, to make more comparisons, I've, maybe if I hadn't read other things in the past that had this kind of stuff, like I've read House of Leaves and I've read Illuminae, and I think both of those do this sort of like meta commentary in book much, much better. Especially like House of Leaves. House of Leaves is a cult classic, and it has this multi-layered meta commentary over the text and then the annotations, and there is a discussion among narratives there, and like, but with this, the annotations and the endnotes basically are two things. One, they are info dumps. They're a lazy way for her to add just like world building information that, at least again through the first 220 pages, added nothing to the value of my reading experience. I didn't care. I would read them and just be like, okay, all right, I'll see if I can remember that, and then and I never even found myself having to go back and reread them because I'm like, oh, I missed something here. I need to go back and like, no, it didn't happen. And the other thing is that when they weren't world building info dumps, they were super predictable, eye-rollingly dumb attempts at humor.
Oh, at humor. Okay. Do you have... Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Like there would be a thing where like I'd be reading a sentence and it's with Kieran maybe talking to Moria, and he says like, oh, this is the way things are. And as I'm reading, I see the little asterisk at the end of the sentence, and I know that the moment I click on that, it's going to bring me to a note, and it's just going to say, this is actually not the way things are, in this, like,
Yeah.
tongue-in-cheek, supposedly funny way. And it's like, everybody and their mom knew that was coming. Like,
See, I didn't find it as predictable as you seemed to. There were a few points
ugh.
with the asterisks that I found myself kind of chuckling along with the Rashad Dolores' kind of commentary there. One moment that comes to mind was when he was talking, I think he was in Butterbean? Listen to me. Butterbelly's
Butterbelly.
shop, and he was trying to sell the one Vane Soulstone, and he was saying something about how it was as hard or as valuable as Diamond, and twice in a row we had Dolores just inserting that it was more, actually. And then, it was harder, actually. But it didn't sound so, it didn't have like that kind of snarky tone that I inadvertently put on that one there.
Well, and for instance, with those, like, what value does that add for us?
If
like,
it
that
was
means
somehow,
nothing.
if you didn't have to click on it, because honestly, with the audiobook, it was actually awesome. Because in the audiobook, the annotations obviously aren't going to come at the end. You don't have to click on anything. They're going to be inserted right in between that one line in the next appropriately. So in the audiobook, actually, those moments flowed pretty well because there was also a clear break in like the voice that's used for the narration as well. So for example, I doubt you listened to any part of the audiobook.
No.
Okay, so like this particular part I think is actually easier to stomach with the audiobook just because you have the separate narrative voices and the way they insert them so flawlessly. It does kind of work a little more.
See, to me, like, this is just like an unnecessary, like, attempt by Lyons to say, look at how clever I am.
Oh,
when
there were
the
lots
more
of those
efficient
moments.
way would just be have Butterbelly say, this is harder than a diamond.
But I mean, Butterbelly is also kind of trying to negotiate for a cheaper price on
Well,
it.
but like, you're in his head though. You can just have him
right.
think about it.
I remember Kieran being surprised that she actually had Butterbelly. That's right. Huh. Yeah, no, I agree mostly with everything you just said.
Yeah, like, I just, like, so much of this book on paper, like, so to speak, to use the idiom, on paper, this book should be awesome and experimental and challenging and rewarding, when in fact it is challenging but for all the wrong reasons and is not rewarding at all. Like, it was I feel bad just like piling on, but like, this is the worst reading experience I've had in years. Like, I hated this book.
This is without a doubt in my mind the lowest quality book that we have covered yet on the Inking Out Loud podcast. Maybe the lowest quality book that we ever do cover, unless, and here's I guess a little bit of a sneak peek of what we're kind of planning for the future, but Drew and I may or may not be, no promises, delving into 50 Shades of Grey for a potential Patreon exclusive episode in the future, that kind of thing. I don't know if that's going to, I mean, I think it is going to be worse. I have read a tiny bit of that one. I've tried.
I've read the first 50 Shades book, and
you read the whole first book? You made it through it?
It was bad.
It took me 4 attempts to get like halfway through. I just wanted to pour bleach in my ears and forget it ever happened. But anyway, we're getting off track here. This book isn't that bad. It's not that bad, but I really am not even remotely interested in continuing on with the second installment whenever it does come out. Like, spend my time on better things.
And so I want to like kind of address another part of like the world building and just the premise of this story, and something that I'm finding myself increasingly wearied of.
Okay.
Wearied by, I guess. And that is what I have come to term whorehouse fantasy.
Ah!
It seems like every single new fantasy has to start out with an oppressed preteen or teen character in a brothel. and like, I mean, it's been this summer, I've been kind of going through and reading some of like the free ebooks I can find places, and just, trying out new authors, and like the last 4, now including Ruin of Kings, that I've picked up have all started the exact same way, with a thief who lives or has family in a whorehouse. And I'm like, this trope is so fucking tired. It's just a lazy way for authors to be like, oh, look at how edgy and grimdark my world is. Like,
I have so many fucking everything's the same.
Be creative. Come up with different ways to have bad things happen to your characters. Like, sexual violence doesn't need to be the automatic foundation for grimdark. Like, it's so frustrating. And so of these recent 4 books that I've been, delving into, the only one that I'm gonna finish, the only one that I think is well written, that does this is A Shadow in Summer by Daniel Abraham. It's the first of the Long Price Quartet.
Oh yeah.
And it's because the like brothel side of things is handled in a very different way. The character who's in the brothel is like a 65-year-old woman who basically gets like forcibly hired to do the books for this guy who runs a brothel.
Damn.
Like it's not about like teenagers, it's not about prostitutes. It's about the accountant.
Okay.
And so, but even then, like I struggled through some of those chapters in that book, which I was enjoying a lot, because I'm like, another freaking brothel. Like, come on, and so the moment we started this one, and Kieran goes back to where he lives, and it's a velvet house, and I'm like, yep, all right, like,
here we go again.
Oh, it's.
How are they going to try to make it different this time?
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing is, like, thieves. Like, can we get over the thief, like, trend
I found
already?
it to be very, very overdone. Like, it was overdone 10 years ago.
Yeah, it was like the big ones that's, like, kicked it off were, like, the Lies of Locke Lamora and Mistborn, and then suddenly everybody who wanted to write, a gritty fantasy had to make it about thieves. Like,
yeah.
So
I don't know. On the subject of the whorehouse fantasy, I will say I had definitely written this down as a specific point to bring up. There's just too much sexual stuff everywhere in this book. Seriously, it seemed to me like Lyons can't go as much as 2 pages without reminding us that she's also crude. And the whole world is crude, and it's full of sex and violence and sexual violence, and it feels to me like she's almost trying to equalize this, like the entirety of the sexual gratification and violence coming from all published male authors, and she's just trying to kind of bring that balance up a little bit by going way overboard and way too many times, and just trying to shock you. I just it got boring to me.
Yeah.
It lost its shock value after the first 100 times, and the 500 that followed, I just rolled my eyes. I was like, okay, come on now.
Yeah, it's just like, it's a trope at this point. It's a cliche in this genre, and I think authors need to just move on and get a little more creative already.
Yeah.
But so my last style point that I really want to talk about is maybe the most baffling thing about this book. And I'm not going to pretend that I know all the ins and outs, all the details here, but I do know that Lyons was signed to a contract to release all 5 of the books in this series.
She signed on for 5 already?
And yeah, for millions of dollars. And not only that, but they have a 9-month production and release schedule where each book is supposed to come out 9 months apart.
Okay,
which tells me,
what the fuck are you doing?
Which tells me she's already written this whole thing. Or at least she's written the first 3 and is in the middle of the 4th.
To Patrick Rothfuss.
But the thing that concerns me the most is that were this the first book in the series and she signed a 1-book contract and maybe had an option for a trilogy depending on sales, I would have more trust in her ability to learn and grow as an author and correct the mistakes she made in this book as she goes, the way we've seen Brandon Sanderson grow as an author, for instance. He had major crutches and flaws in his early writing, things like pacing and some character issues and whatnot, but he just keeps getting better.
Yeah.
Whereas Jenn Lyons, if she's already written all of these books, because I'm sorry, there's no way that she's writing a book in the 4 months it takes to then get it through editing and get it through publication and out the door into stores in 9 months. Like
One
there's
could
no
argue
way
that a lot of
she's
that
doing
time
that.
would be best spent, obviously, just in review if you have the actual rough done
Exactly.
already. Like someone
And
like Sanderson can review each of his books in 2-3 months apiece, but that's because it takes a lot of time to get that good.
and Sanderson has a huge support structure, which I know a little bit about being a beta reader. Like, you know, he's got a crazy editorial period on all of his books that even overlaps with him writing the draft. Like the way he does his Stormlight books,
Yeah.
he'll finish like part 1 and send it off to his editor.
Mm-hmm.
And then work on part 2. And then when he gets feedback as he's getting later through the book, then he'll go back and like change things in a second draft. But like the thing with this though is like I have no faith that subsequent books in the series are going to be any better than this if she's already written them. Like
I won't quite agree with that. I think a lot can be done in the revision process. Obviously, granted, if you have a big support structure, or at least, you know, adequate support structure, they could be better.
I don't know. I just don't see. I don't see the possibility in such a short turnover rate. 9 months per book. Like,
if they're on par with this, no, it's not worth my time at all.
Like, yeah. I mean,
yeah. I feel like
that just troubles me. Like when I heard that, I was blown away.
I want to compliment about. Like, I want to like throw a few more compliments forward before we get like back into the shit, because I have a lot more to bitch about. But first I want to make sure that you're done with narratively speaking, like with your style discussion.
Yeah, I think I'm done.
The main body of it for now until I remind you of something else here and there.
Yeah, I think I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So I will say I felt like it started in a solid place, like for example with Kieran's story. He's being sold as a slave and suddenly the prices are skyrocketing. That whole scene did kind of lend itself to like a whole out of control vibe, like, oh crap, something is happening greater than my understanding.
Okay.
I also felt that the pacing of the story was quick, at least at the beginning, but it was still somehow unsatisfying. Like, I was totally like into the book during Kieran's story when he's on the Misery and the Kraken arrives and the imagery of the ocean churning and frothing with pink, the sound of the whales screaming, like the Kraken. It was horrifying. The fact that it doesn't have suction cups but it has teeth, like that was that was horrifying to read. I feel like Lyons can do grimdark if she does it in the right way. But I mean, that's really one of the only compliments I have going forward. What about you, dude? Like,
well, so I want to just kind of bring up like the one line that I highlighted in my copy.
Yeah, okay.
For a good reason that I will admit, like it made me laugh out loud. Was when Kieran is going to General Milligreast's estate, and he first meets Elidor. And Kieran goes, "Does your mother know she shouldn't put your hair in braids like that? People might think you're a girl."
Yeah. That was a pretty good one. That was a pretty good one.
Yeah.
Something also that pissed me off later in that same scene, or maybe it was the very next scene narratively that followed it, was the fact that Kieran, first off, for some reason he doesn't recognize Darzan Damon's name. I mean, Milligreast literally just told Kieran his name like minutes before that. The man who owns Moria's sister, the guy who's so cruel. Like, it's all clicking together and Kieran's being a complete nincompoop. But where Kieran really pissed me off was when he decided not to tell Milligreast about Damon's summoning of the demon because he thinks he won't be believed. Milligreast clearly hates Darzan Damon. Of course he would believe that. I just felt like that was... I wrote down at this point, I said, seriously, Lyons? Seriously, that is a fucking lame excuse. Like, I just... it bothered me.
Yeah.
It bothered me.
No, I'm with you. There were a lot of things that felt, like, contrived. This goes to my earlier point about, like, transitions in scene and narrative, and how, like... It feels really obvious. Like, Lyon's hand on the story feels really obvious at points.
Yep.
where like she's writing a scene and realizes, oh, I need to move it to here, so she just moves it and doesn't bother like building any kind of bridge between, like and things like that, where it's like a contrived way to direct the course of events instead of having it feel natural to what the characters are like.
Yeah. Agreed.
So
there's even lazy moments in descriptive writing that really pissed me off, okay? I know I said I wanted to get into more compliments here, but God, I've just got so much to bitch about, okay? There's a moment in chapter 33. So this would have been right around the spot that you ended. I think you ended at 35 or something like that.
Yeah, I left off at 35.
When Kieran attempts to describe the immensity of the old man, and he says, take the largest creature you can imagine. At which point, I expected like a clever metaphor or a simile or something to the extent of the creature would be like a bird on the old man's shoulder, something along that line, something creative. But instead, what Lyons offered us was take the largest creature you can imagine. The old man was bigger. I was like, seriously? That's what you were building up to? What the fuck? It pissed me off.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I do remember that. I remember like thinking, I was like, that was like kind of a letdown.
God damn it.
And the way she did it with like an ellipses too. It wasn't.
I couldn't tell. I was.
Yeah. So the actual sentence is like, take the largest creature you can imagine. ...
Ellipses?
Really? The old man was larger.
Oh God.
I'm like,
that's like
that's just not a good
sentence.
sentence.
To write a fucking story right there. That's just. I will say there was a line that followed that one very shortly that actually made me laugh out loud. I think it was just after Kieran met Doc, or maybe did you meet Doc? He shows up on Yinastane as his sword master. No, you probably didn't meet him.
I don't think so. No.
Okay, so it must have been saying that to Wraith, but at one point he just stops and looks at Wraith and Kieran says, "Just curious, has anyone ever told you you're an asshole?" I don't know. It was a very like startlingly real thing to say to somebody in a very hectic moment that kind of relieved the tension for me. I will say I thought she
sounds
nailed
like
it with that one.
Sounds like something the Horse Witch would say to Cain.
Right? There are yeah. Anyway, should we discuss? Are any of these characters even worth discussing on an individual level?
I do think so.
Yeah. I have a couple
Kieran,
I want to discuss. Yeah, sure.
Like, I mean, we have to talk about Kieran.
I guess we have to. Yeah.
And I'll say this for Kieran. Like, he is a fine enough main character. There are points when I found myself, like, interested in him. And like, but my biggest issue is that I didn't care about the stakes for him. I never felt like there was much momentum or much of a goalpost for him through the first like half of this book. I never really cared what happened to him, especially because of the way it's framed, where we know he's not gonna die because the book starts with him telling his story, and I didn't care enough or like him enough to be bothered by non-death things that could happen to him, especially because the demon deal in the middle of the street happens so early on.
Yeah.
That like it was like Lyons hit you with a sledgehammer of like consequences for Kieran, and then everything after that just feels like meh.
Yeah.
But yeah, so with Kieran, as I was saying, I never felt much like pressure in the stakes of his story in either narrative, because in the one narrative he just came from slavery and has already been abused and all of this stuff. He's not gonna die, and in the other narrative he has this like horrific like demonic experience where he's like forced to see himself doing all of these horrible things. It's like, All right. Like why do I care? Why do I care about this character? And I know I
Yeah.
made a comparison earlier in the episode to Malazan, and I had a very similar thing with reading Gardens of the Moon. The 3 times I tried to get through that book, I just never cared about the characters. I
Yeah.
didn't I didn't have any reason to connect with them. And that is, you know, that is very much the case with Kieran in this book, because I never felt there were real stakes for him established from the
Hmm.
get-go. Like there's like that opening scene where there's something like, he caused the burning of the Capitol with like, capital B, capital C, and I'm like, okay,
Oh, they
that's
were
an
both
attempt
capital.
at establishing stakes,
Okay.
but I don't know or care about what the Capitol is. So, like, using the world as like a driver, damage to the world as a driver for stakes only works if the people are your readers are invested in your world. And that's something that, for instance, Stephen R. Donaldson does very, very well in the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, where he has one of the most unlikable main characters you will ever read, but you still root for him because you know he's the only one who can save the land, and you love the land.
Hmm.
So, like, there's just none of that here.
Interesting.
And I know some people who really love Malazan will say, yeah, it's not a character driven story, it's a plot driven story, it's about the history and wars of this world. And I'm like, okay, cool. So those people got really invested in the world. There's nothing like that here to get invested with,
Huh.
like for me. Because the world, anytime you try to engage with it, you're just buried under a mountain of random terms and names that come with no context attached and you again don't care about. So like it's just an immediate failing in this story that from the get-go there was nothing for me to latch on to as a reader.
Hmm. Well,
And
going.
Kieran is like emblematic of that, because like
Yeah.
he's, as a person, he's fine. Like I don't have anything necessarily against him as a person. He's not a character that I like hate because of his actions or whatever, but like I just don't really care about him because I don't feel there are stakes attached to his character that I should care about.
Hmm. Well, going forward with Kieran specifically, I agree with a lot of what you just said. Like Kieran, I kept waiting for that reason to give a shit about Kieran. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, it wasn't so much about him, but it was about who he was trying to. For example, it was Talia. A lot of his narrative is him trying to figure out his feelings of guilt with Moria's death, and how he can perhaps find some redemption, perhaps,
Yeah.
in attempting to keep his promise and find her sister and
Mm-hmm.
save her slave sister. That was something that gave me reason to care about Kieran's story. But that wasn't for Kieran. It's again, like Kieran as a character, I found him to be appropriately witty, perhaps a little willfully ignorant. Um, he's fine to read. He's not boring. I wouldn't call him boring, but there's
No.
not a lot of reasons. There aren't many reasons that Lyons gave us to actually care about where he's going or even why
Yeah.
this is happening
The
to him.
Like the closest I came to really caring and being intrigued by Kieran was that first conversation with Terath and Kamezra. It's Kamezra, right?
Yeah, Kamezra.
Yeah. That her name, like, it just,
Really, I
for
really
some
like that
reason, every
name.
time I read her name, it was just like a jumble of letters.
That was something that Drew actually wrote to me too when he tried to write Kamezra's name. He just wrote like Kaz and then just mashed the keyboard for about 40 sentences or 40 characters and said however the fuck you spell her name. That gave me a good laugh.
But it was that first conversation when you find out more about who Relis Var is,
Hmm.
and
How
the
dangerous he
fact
is.
that Relis Var is so interested in Kieran. That was the moment that I felt the hook was set for me,
Okay.
but I was never drawn in after that. Like maybe there's a point later in this book where like that line gets pulled taut and you're reeled in, but that I never got there. I lost interest long before that. You know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No. Yeah, I don't know. There were a lot. I still wanna bitch about more things, but Kieran, have we pretty much wrapped up our discussion of Kieran? Is there anybody else you want to move on to,
um
specifically?
I'm done with Kieran. The only other real like character notes that I have are like I thought Morio was an interesting character, but obviously that didn't last. And then uh, Relos Var was probably the coolest part of this book for me.
Really, you
Had a
never
little bit
saw
of
him
that.
except for in one single scene.
Well, yeah, because he has that air of mystery. It's a to draw back to a recent book we read, like a Cressides the Great kind of.
This threat waiting in the wings.
Yeah, like an inconceivably ancient and powerful, mysterious figure. Like,
Oh yeah, you
okay,
don't even know anything about Relos Far at the point that you're at. You learn about a
yeah,
lot more about his history, and it's even more intimidating than you know at this
yeah.
point. Trust me, it's actually
So
kind of cool.
yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like, he's the coolest part of this book to me.
Hmm.
So
Well, I did want to discuss. Hold on, you never met Galen?
Galen.
Uh, fucking
I don't think
Darzin
so.
Damon's other son.
Um,
No, okay.
I
He
don't
was pretty good
believe
character to
so.
read. Your heart just bleeds for this poor kid. Darzin Damon has another son who was originally supposed to be the Lord Heir, and Darzin really mistreats him because of how soft he is and how kind he is. He kind of reads like Renarin from the Stormlight Archive a little bit. Darzin
Okay.
was a kind of he was a character that you kind of just feel really bad for, at least at the point where I am. Like I said, I made it 71% or something like that of the way through this narrative. So for all I know, he's a big bad guy too. But he reads very sympathetically. He's a very sympathetic character, and it's tough to be in his head when his father treats him like that. But somebody I actually got really excited about discussing was Tyanso, the witch who originally
Okay.
summoned the demon and gauged Kieran, because and at this point where you're at, Drew, at around chapter 35 or something like that, she really hasn't started her whole kind of attempt at redemption yet, but she does going forward, and she is hands down the most I would say interesting character, past where you're at, because she definitely has a lot of moments when she for on Yenistane on the island. She has a lot of one-on-ones with Kieran. As he's, training with the Black Brotherhood, by the way. The name, the Black Brotherhood.
Yeah.
Oh my god, when I read that for the first time, I heard it for the first time, I actually paused my audiobook and just looked at the wall in front of me going, wow. But anyway, Tyanso, she has a lot of moments later on when she decides, I'm going to try and help Kieran. Because he's caught between the Black Brotherhood and Relos Var. He's trapped on the island by this, the old man, the dragon. She kind of sympathizes for him, and she starts questioning a lot about her past decisions and a lot of evil things she's done in the past. And she decides to try and help him and kind of make amends in that way. And she does do a lot to sacrifice for him in the future. Tyanso to me felt like one of the only multi-dimensional characters in this book. What did you think of Tyanso, at least with the limited experience that you had with her?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't really give her much like attention, but you do raise a good point there. She was certainly the most dynamic of
Yes.
the crew. Like she has stuff to at least like engage with as a reader in her character. She's not just like a cardboard cutout of like a slave owner or a whatever, and or even like she's not a cardboard cutout of like a an eccentric witch. She has
Yeah.
like there's more to her than just that. So that is a good point. I'll agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's pretty much the end of my character discussion here, or at least the points I have made about specific characters. I think if I find more, I'll let you know.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's fine.
Shall we continue with our bitching though?
Well, I'm pretty much done with my commentary on this book. I think.
Wow.
If you wanna throw some final thoughts in,
Yeah. No.
go for it.
I've got.
We are at we're getting close to about 50 minutes here, so.
Yeah. I want to give compliment to the audiobook narrators. They did a wonderful job on this book. for the most part. There were a few questionable things, but the audiobook narrators did a fantastic job. There was a moment at one point when one of the female audiobook narrators, I don't know who it was, but there was a line, for example, when a character was in a very tense situation and they were described as licking their lips before they spoke their next sentence, and you can actually hear the audiobook narrator doing just that. Continued. Like, it was very, very good. Like, they have strong voices. I think they are too good for this book. I will say that much.
So
too.
I actually have a question about that. Did they have like a female narrator for Talon's story and a male narrator for Kieran's?
You nailed it. You absolutely nailed it.
That's a good touch.
They had a female for Talon's story, and they had a male for Kieran's story. I will say I was really underwhelmed with the voice that the male narrator gave during Kieran's story to the old man. I was very disappointed with that because I was expecting something, you know, what he gave us was just like this kind of throat rasping whisper. It was like, "I am the old man." It was horrible. It was like how is it that this dragon the size of an island sounds like a 90-year-old asthmatic? I was like, what the hell am I listening to? I was thinking it should be like a deeper bass rumble, you know, something like something along
Stefan
the lines
Rudnicki did for Milekov.
Yes, or something even more with more rumble to it, something like something like that. I am the fire. Something bigger, something with more earth to it, not this. It sounded
not like
painful.
a geriatric smoker.
Yeah. It was, I don't know. So yeah, I discussed the narrators. They did a fantastic job, except for that one little nitpick that I had.
Okay.
And a couple of just these winning one-liners that we had. For example, I think it was Galen, I want to say, who was worried that Kieran was going to tell their father he did something bad. When Kieran like stumbled upon him doing something that he wasn't supposed to do. So
I just want to say, you're saying Galen?
Yeah, I think it was Galen. I might be misremembering it.
I think I did meet him, but I pronounce it Galen.
Galen, yeah, Galen.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I was just thrown off by your pronunciation.
Galen, so I started writing it down Gallon or Galon,
Yeah.
like Talon. But then I actually read the book from like 40% to 70%, and I actually saw the thing there. For some reason, I just kept pronouncing it the way the audiobook did. But yeah, Galen. Okay. Sorry. So
gotcha.
You did meet him, I think.
Yeah, very briefly. I think I met him like maybe the chapter before I left off. Maybe 2 chapters before I left off.
Yeah.
But
this line in question here was when I think it was Kieran stumbled across, you know, Galen doing something he thought he wasn't supposed to be doing. And he expressed worry, concern that Kieran was going to tell their father. And Kieran just goes, "What, you kidding me? Tell Darzan Damon? I wouldn't tell him to wipe shit off his face." I thought that was pretty funny. That made me laugh pretty good.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one.
That's almost like a Kane level insult there. Like, I liked it.
Yeah.
And then sorry, you sounded like you were about to go off on a point there.
No.
Okay. Well, I still have more to bitch about now, since we're on here. These goddamn the overly complex twists and the mysteries surrounding the actual lineage of literally every single character that we have here. Like, oh my god. For example, I have a quote here. I have 2 quotes here. The first one: "He was our great uncle. His mother was this Vane slave with golden hair who was murdered by one of the family. So she gave birth to Pedrin's sister, Tashar. So this Vane slave had 3 children, right? Pedrin, Tashar, and Theron's father. No. Theron's father was Pedrin's half-brother. My mother says that Pedrin owned your mother, that is, Lyrillin, you know, before she married our father." And I stopped at this point to write down, oh my god, I don't fucking care. I don't care about any of this fucking soap opera bullshit. Right?
Yeah.
And another one from like 2 chapters later. Kieran he finds out something crazy, something amazing. He goes, "My mother is the Vane queen?" And Doc goes, "No, your mother is a Vane handmaiden, or was a Vane handmaiden, possessed by the soul of a Vane queen. Or Maya was a traitor and an assassin, as she attempted to kill the queen, and you are her son. Although since King Kalanis is probably the one who ordered Maya to assassinate his sister, Queen Cariel, I guess that makes you the son of a patriot too. Vane politics get complicated. And then he smirks, and he says, you might want to draw up a chart. And I stopped to write down, and I might want to throw this fucking book into a fire, Jenn Lyons. Gee, Christ, with this. It's so fucking much. This is what, that right there is why I stopped reading this book.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I didn't get that far.
It's a genealogical fucking lecture every other page. It's like, oh my god.
Yeah.
It drags.
Yeah. well, shall we move into the final draft here?
Yeah, I think we've pooped on this book adequately.
Yeah, we just spent like 56 minutes just absolutely trashing this book, so.
Yeah, we did. Hey, this is what you listen for. This is a review, not a lecture.
Yeah.
We tell you what we think. And
I'll tell you, like, this was a cathartic experience for me. I feel like a weight has come off my shoulders.
Yeah?
I can just put this book behind me now and never give it any attention ever again and just
at least
move
until
on with my
someone
life.
comes up to you later and calls us both sexist for not liking this fucking book for whatever reason.
Oh, well, if somebody says that, that's their problem.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, final draft.
Yeah, what do you got for me, Rob?
Okay, so I figured since we are dealing with the lousiest, cheapest, dumb... No, I wouldn't want to say cheapest. Apparently she was paid a lot of money for it. But just the lowest quality, the lowest tier book that we have yet discussed on this podcast. I figured it was only appropriate for me to bring to the podcast the cheapest, shittiest beer that I could possibly find. This is something I didn't know existed until recently. Up here in Canada, we have a brand of, I guess, groceries you could find all over the place called No Name with a very, very basic yellow label. And what I have here, my man, is a No Name beer.
It's just called beer.
It's just called beer. I wish you could see this box beside me. It's literally, it looks like a movie prop. It's just a brown bottle with a yellow label slapped on it that just says beer. That's all it says. And then below it, the French translation, bière.
Wow.
That's all it is. It also says 5% alcohol by volume. That's all it says.
All right.
And if I were to describe how this beer tastes, I would say if wet bread was a drink, it would be this.
Okay. All right.
So, yeah, I mean, that's basically all that needs to be said about it. It's No Name beer. So I think it fit our book of the week perfectly. What are you drinking, dude?
So I brought in a milkshake IPA.
Ooh, I've had one of those.
Brewed with apricot, peach, vanilla, and lactose from Four Noses Brewing Company in Denver. Well, I guess it's like technically Broomfield. It's a suburb of Denver, in Colorado. And unlike The Ruin of Kings, this is a really balanced beer. It adapts a myriad of flavors well together. It's not jarring. It doesn't leave me hanging. And it is altogether satisfying. And also, unlike The Ruin of Kings, I don't get annoyed as hell every time I see the word velvet on it. And this is called Apricot Velvet.
Oh, man. Well done, my man. At least you still managed to salvage some part of this episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to try for a different beer. I was going to go for Ruination IPA from Stone.
Oh.
But, yeah, because obviously the name, but also I feel like Ruin of Kings is just like the ruination of the written word. And, but I unfortunately couldn't find any of that. So I ended up going with Apricot Velvet.
Oh.
But yeah, so that said,
this has been a fun episode, at least. It's been very fun.
It has. This is what, episode 33? 32? 33?
Shit. I think it's 32. No, wait, hold on.
I don't even know. I feel like I need to pull up
No, it's
pull up
33
my
because I'm pretty sure
spreadsheet.
32 was the end of the Dragon Reborn. With
That
Krang.
sounds right. Well, let's just call it episode 33, and if it's not, listeners
I
make
just
fun
did it
of
in
us.
my head. It's definitely 33.
If
If I'm wrong, Pat will insert a wah noise right here.
yeah, so obviously, episode 33 of the Inking Out Loud podcast. Next up, though, we are going back to the Wheel of Time. We are going to be covering chapters 1 through 21 of The Shadow Rising. We're going to have a returning guest, and we're also going to have a new special guest who is reading the Wheel of Time for the first time. So unlike our previous Wheel of Time episodes, this one will not be a spoiler zone. We're going to try to keep it as spoiler-free as possible to respect my friend's reading experience. So just keep that in mind for that one. But it will be, like I said, through chapter 21 of The Shadow Rising. And yeah, if you want to get early access to that, as Rob mentioned at the top of the show, you can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/inkingoutloud. We got 4 tiers, we got lots of great benefits, and all that money goes straight toward paying our support system, our sound engineer, our artist, and we are in the works on a website as well. So hopefully we can improve your engagement experience with our podcast. And yeah, so as always, I am your host, Drew McCaffrey, and with me is my co-host, Rob Santos.
Fuck me.
And thanks for joining us.
Thank
We'll
you,
catch you next
everybody.
time.
Bye-bye now.